Hello, and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr. McDonald. In this episode, I'll be reading and discussing the section of great events in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and I also have a discussion of the film About Schmidt from 2002, starring Jack Nicholson. So let's get started. Of great events. There is an island in the sea, not far from the blissful islands of Zarathustra, upon which a volcano continually smokes. The people, and especially the old woman among the people, say that it is placed like a block of stone before the gate of the underworld, but that the narrow downward path which leads to this gate of the underworld passes through the volcano itself. Now, at the time Zarathustra was living on the blissful islands, it happened that a ship dropped anchor at the island upon which the smoking mountain stood, and its crew landed in order to shoot rabbits. Toward the hour of noon, however, when the captain and his men were reassembled, they suddenly saw a man coming towards them through the air, and a voice said clearly, "It is time, it is high time." But as the figure was closest to them, it flew quickly past. However, like a shadow in the direction of the volcano, they recognized with the greatest consternation that it was Zarathustra, for all of them had seen him before, except the captain himself, and they loved him as the people love, that is, with love and awe in equal parts. "Just look," said the old steersman, "there is Zarathustra going to hell." At the same time as these sailors landed on the volcano island, the rumor went around that Zarathustra had disappeared, and when his friends were questioned, they said that he had gone aboard a ship by night without saying where he intended to sail. Thus there arose a disquiet after 3 days. However, there was added to this disquiet the story of the sailors, and then all the people said that the devil had carried Zarathustra off. Of course, his disciples laughed at this talk, and one of them even said, "I would rather believe that Zarathustra had carried off the devil." But at the bottom of their souls they were all full of apprehension and longing. So great was their joy when on the 5th day Zarathustra appeared among them. And this is the tale of Zarathustra's conversation with the fire dog. "The earth," he says, "has a skin, and this skin has diseases. One of these diseases, for example, is called man, and another of these diseases is called the fire dog. Men have told many lies, and been told many lies about him. To fathom this secret, I fared across the sea, and have seen truth naked, truly barefoot to the neck. Now I know all about the fire dog, and also all about the revolutionary and subversive devils which not only old women fear. Up with you, fire dog, up from your depths," I cried, "and confess how deep that depth is. Where does it come from, that which you snore up? You drink deeply from the sea, your bitter eloquence betrays that. Truly, for a dog of the depths, you take your food too much from the surface. At best, I have told you to be the earth's ventriloquist, and when I have heard subversive and revolutionary devils speak, I have always found them like you, bitter, lying, superficial. You understand how to bellow and how to darken the air with ashes. You are the greatest braggart, and have sufficiently learned the art of making mud boil. Where you are, there must always be mud around, and much that is spongy, hollow, and compressed. It wants to be freed. Freedom, you almost like to bellow. But I have unlearned belief in great events, whenever there is much bellowing and smoke about them." So initially kicking off this section, then we have a description of an island with an active volcano in which smoke is coming from it. And then quite humorously as well, we have this character running quite happily towards the volcano, and saying it's time, it's high time, and then you find out that that character is Zarathustra. So it's quite funny in a way that suddenly we have as an image Zarathustra getting incredibly happy and excited about wanting to run straight into a mountain again, because Zarathustra really loves his mountains. By this point, he's went up, he's went down. As soon as he sees a mountain, he just makes a straight beeline for it. And the whole significance about the volcano as well is got that nice relation into a classical mythology and the whole relation into the underworld. And so just a little bit brief information about that as well is that within classical Greek mythology, ultimately there were certain entrance ways that was all around the world that if you went into it would be an entrance way down into the underworld, and the underworld is ultimately the place which people go once they're dead. And we have those whole fantastic images of Hades as god of the underworld, and the whole idea of paying the ferryman to go across in the boat and so forth to take you into the land of the dead. And so therefore we have Zarathustra going quite happily down into the depths, as he says, to go and converse with what's down there. And what he talks with, of course, is a fire dog, and it's not quite apparent exactly what this fire dog is. Is it simply a dog that so happens to speak? Is it a devil? Is it something that's in relation to mythology? There's no clear sort of idea of what that is. But nevertheless, it's the whole idea that it's precisely something from the depths, from the underworld itself, that he's meant to be having a wee conversation with. And then we have the whole image here of ultimately a way in relation perhaps into the afterlife here, in which is meant to be of the depths, he says, but it ultimately has that relation back into the surface again, because really when we have those whole afterlife images and that, let's say of heaven, then it's very much of the surface level as well, because what ultimately would people want as a happy afterlife would be all the pleasures and all the desires that made them happy in this world, and so it's completely on the surface level. And then we start to get into the meat and bones of this section in the next little bit, so let's continue on with that little bit. And believe me, friend, infernal racket, the greatest events, they are not our noisiest but our stillest hours. The world revolves not around the inventors of new noises, but around the inventors of new values. It revolves inaudibly. And just confess, little was ever found to have happened when your noise and smoke dispersed. What did it matter that a town had been mummified and a statue lay in the mud? And I say this to overthrowers of statues. To throw salt into the sea and statues into the mud are perhaps the greatest of follies. The statue lay in the mud of your contempt, but this precisely is its law, that its life and living beauty grow again out of contempt. And now it rises again with diviner features and sorrowful seductive. And in truth, it will even thank you for overthrowing it, you overthrowers. I tender, however, this advice to kings and churches and all that is weak with age and virtue. Only let yourselves be overthrown, that you may return to life, and that virtue may return to you. Thus I spoke before the fire dog. Then he interrupted me sullenly and asked, "The church? What is that then?" "The church," I answered. "The church is kind of state, and indeed the most mendacious kind. But keep quiet, you hypocrite dog. You surely know your own kind best. Like you, the state is a hypocrite dog. Like you, it likes to speak with smoke and bellowing, to make believe, like you, that it speaks out of the belly of things. For the state wants to be absolutely the most important beast on earth. It is believed to be so too." When I said that, the fire dog acted as if he were mad with envy. "What?" he cried. "The most important beast on earth? And it is believed to be so too? and so much steam and hideous shrieking came from his throat, I thought he would choke with vexation and envy. At length he grew quieter, and his panting ceased. As soon as he was quiet, however, I said, laughing, "You are vexed, fire dog, therefore I am right about you. And that I may press my point, let me speak of another fire dog, which really speaks from the heart of the earth. His breath exhales gold and golden rain, so his heart will have it. What are ashes and smoke and hot mud to him now? Laughter flutters from him like a motley cloud. He is ill disposed towards your guggling and spitting and griping of the bowels. Gold and laughter, however, he takes from the heart of the earth, for, that you may know it, the heart of the earth is of gold." And when the fire dog heard this, he could no longer bear to listen to me. Abashed, he drew in his tail and said, "Bow wow," in a small voice, and crawled down into his cave. Thus narrated Zarathustra. But his disciples hardly listened to him. So great was the desire to tell him about the sailors, the rabbits, and the flying man. "What am I to think of it?" said Zarathustra. "Am I then a ghost? But it will have been my shadow. Surely you have heard something of the wanderer in his shadow. This, however, is certain. I must keep it under stricter control, otherwise it will ruin my reputation." And once again Zarathustra shook his head and wondered. "What am I to think of it?" he said again. Why then did the phantom cry, "It is time, it is high time"? For what then is it high time? Thus spoke Zarathustra. So then we get into the whole heart of the section as well, when Nietzsche starts talking about events. And what an absolutely cracking line. "The greatest events, they are not our noisiest, but our stillest hours. The world revolves not around the inventors of new noises, but around the inventors of new values. It revolves inaudibly." It really makes you think on a really deep level about things, because in a way, historically, things move noisily, let's say, on big, grand scales. Let's say progression through wars, for instance, is a big, noisy events that happen in history. And of course, you can go to any specific example in history that you like, is a big, noisy event that occurs. And everything that tends to happen, of course, is all in this big, very grand scale upon things as well. And it's through all that then you can say, well, it's those who make the grandest, biggest noise are ultimately, let's say, the victors of the situation. So whatever the superior army is, and then they have the whole chance of manipulating and changing history in order for it to be bent towards how they would like others to think about them. So a good example would be the way in which the ancient Roman army would ultimately go around and conquer places and civilizations. And when they did so, they tried to completely eradicate any culture within that society that had been there, and then replace that with the Roman culture that was there. And so you can say, well, there's going to be these countless numbers of civilizations within history that are just completely lost to us because everything's burned, everything's destroyed. And what we're left with is the predominance of Rome, and how ultimately grand, insignificance, and stature is Rome as an idea as well from all that we get. And there's also an interesting criticism here happening as well in relation to philosophy that's going on, because we can say that Nietzsche's here being critical of Hegel's idea of how history works and unfolds, which is in that whole big grand scale of things again. And just very briefly, Hegel's philosophy works in the whole idea, as it's called, of a dialectics. So ultimately you would have two opposing things that would then be synthesized. So let's say within a given historical period, of course, you can have, like, say, two opposing armies that then one army overcomes the other, and therefore everything becomes synthesized. And so Hegel thinks on a very grand scale upon things, in which we're moving through this big movements within history of two opposing forces that then become synthesized, where one force will always overcome the other. And it also takes into account the fact that forces will return back again in this sort of cyclical process as well within history. And that's the sort of explanation for why there's a whole sort of resurgence of neoclassicism and whole Greek ideas within the given German Romantic time period as well, because it's those ideas coming back again. But Nietzsche's the complete opposite here. And to say, well, he is not arguing that history moves on the grand scale, because that would be ultimately those who make the most noise. And as he says, those who make the most noise, what do they ultimately have? Is nothing. So once the smoke disperses, what's there? Nothing at all. What actually does have significance is those people who create new values. What does that mean? It means a new idea, a new way of thinking about things, and not simply either return to how things used to be or a reaffirming of a previous idea. But rather there's a creation of something new that occurs. It's only within new things that ultimately there's any sense of progression within history. And when we think of new things, we always think in terms of grand scales as well, of suddenly there's the invention of this is a significant event, and therefore you make a great big noise about it again. But Nietzsche's point is that when new things occur and new ideas occur, it hardly makes any noise whatsoever, at least within a given time period. Is that whenever there's something significant that does happen, it's normally brushed under the carpet in some way, or within that given time period isn't thought to be very significant at all. It's only later, when we come to think about it in terms of history, that we think of certain people and their ideas as having a great significance upon the way in which we think about the world, or within what they contributed to the world. And so, of course, you can go into, let's say, examples of different writers or inventors and so forth, whose ideas weren't taken to be very significant at all, but then, of course, whose significance was incredibly important for us. And there's a nice wee article as well that's entitled 7 World-Changing Inventions That Were Ridiculed When They Came Out by Clinton Nguyen. And so let's just have a couple examples as well. One's light bulbs, which is of course invented by Thomas Edison. And it says here, when news got out that Edison was developing the first practical electric light bulb, not everyone was impressed. A British Parliament committee noted in 1878 that Edison's light bulb was good enough for our transatlantic friends, but unworthy of the attention of practical or scientific men. Similarly, a chief engineer for the British Post Office said that the subversion of the electric field is an absolute ignis fatuus. In other words, a fairy tale, a sham. Another is coffee, the people ridiculed. And it says here, coffee was first popularly used by Sufi Muslims to stay awake during their nighttime devotions. When the drink was introduced to the public in the Middle East, it was a miracle. People were finding more time in their day to create, discuss, and spread ideas. But throughout the 1500s, different schools of thought began to shun coffee for various reasons. The drink was thought to induce a form of drunkenness, and coffee houses were considered meeting centers for reactionaries, and some even suggested it was causing common diseases. And the last example we have here is airplanes and fighter jets. It says here, the Wright brothers made headlines when they flew the first airplane in 1903. The flight lasted for some 12 seconds. In 1911, Ferdinand Foch A French general and Allied commander during World War I said, "Airplanes are interesting scientific toys, but they are of no military value." A mere 8 years after Foch said that, a Curtiss seaplane made the first trip across the Atlantic Ocean from Newfoundland to Portugal. And so those are some great wee examples as well, all in which people can ridicule an idea that ultimately holds great significance for us later, even if it's something just as simple as a light bulb, or as a fantastic invention, of course, is an airplane. But what's interesting as well is the fact that they don't make any grand noise because of all that ridicule at the time period. It's only later do we realize the importance of it. And then it goes into a criticism of people trying to overthrow things, and therefore it trying to have an effect upon you in some given way. And let's say when a political regime is overthrown, for instance, you can suddenly want to destroy the statues and so forth and topple all the leaders' statues that's been built up and so forth as a great liberation act. But as Nietzsche says here, there's that sort of relation into giving the whole object itself power over you in the first place. And by having the whole act of overthrowing it is giving it more power than what it actually has in the first place. And so it's ultimately just a thing that doesn't really have any significance whatsoever, and all the meaning to it comes from us, and so all our meaning is placed upon the given object. Let's say for our little trinkets that we could ultimately have in our collection or within hobbies and so forth, that other people would look upon them and not think them anything of them whatsoever, but they mean a lot to us who do the specific hobby and so on. But that's the whole point about that sense of overthrowing, is that really itself, he's saying here, is that you're giving it more power than what it actually has. Not only that, you're sort of elevating it to an even greater level than even what people can have. So this divine level, this idolatry, when everybody should just think about removing any significance from it in the first place and sort of ridicule their own significance about how they've thought upon the certain object or statue, and sort of have that sort of form of self-satire about yourself and your own importance that you've placed upon a thing. Because if you don't do that, if you move it to that idolatry level, then you're allowing it precisely to still have power and influence. And that's what the whole point of Nietzsche is saying is, you don't want it to have any power anymore. You should ridicule it. You should question the way in which you thought of it in such a divine way in the first place. And then it goes really interestingly and very fast straight into political philosophy in a discussion of the state and government, and the whole idea about governments making a lot of noise, basically, as if they were want to be the most important beast on earth, as he says. And also we can have the sense of politicians as well, of trying to make a lot of noise and trying to have a lot of importance about themselves and trying to make as much noise as possible. And of course, a great example of somebody who does that is, of course, Donald Trump, because he's a man who constantly makes as much noise as he physically possibly can. He's almost a complete noise machine in a way. But it's the same argument again. You can say, well, once we get rid of all the smoke, once we get rid of all the hot air, what is ultimately left here? Anything significant? No. Why not? Because there's been no relation into the whole idea about creation of new values into an idea of newness in the first place. And so, even though we have this moment in which Nietzsche is really critical about governments, and especially we could take that in a historical sense as well, of within history as well, movements and changing of governments through war and voting and so on, all meant to be big grand events that occur within history, But really, it's to say, well, not really, because we have to say, well, when is it important? When does government work, basically? Is that when government ultimately introduces new values, new ideas, a new way of thinking about things. Because there's also that fantastic line as well. What does all the hot air and all the smoke really go into? Gold, as he says, and gold is the heart of the earth. So we have that really fantastic relation into Marx as well. That fantastic argument that Marx makes is that there is no God anymore because what is God now? Money is God. Everybody worships money. And so it's the same argument here in a way in which you have ultimately all the hot air, all the noise. Why is that the case? Because everything that they're focused upon is precisely gold, is precisely wealth, and therefore the accumulation of wealth. And then we can get into the whole idea about, well, that's what government's about, the accumulation of wealth, taxes, making themselves richer, and therefore everything that they do will ultimately to be a benefit to themselves. And therefore, all the noise that they make and anything good that they ultimately have to say or do for other people will always be with the idea of gold behind it and wealth accumulation. In contrast to all this, we can say, and we can build upon the idea then that government and good government should have the whole relation not into wealth and greed, but a good government should ultimately be one that produces new values. And of course, it is a question, almost one that goes in with the question at the end. It's high time. What is it high time for? Maybe it is that rhetorical question, and to say, well, is it even possible for anyone to create something, especially on a government level, about things, about new values? Isn't it high time we start looking at the inaudible, as he says, all the little things, rather than focused on all the big things all the time? And really, when you think about it in terms of the government scale of things, if you looked at all the little things, then you would manage to sort all the big things out. And it nicely sort of fits into the whole idea of, well, everybody should focus on the problems with their own local communities and cities and towns, and focus on the little problems that happens there. And once those are starting to be solved, then the whole thing as a country starts to resolve the bigger problems that happen. And so it has a nice little knock-on effect to that as well. But it all starts with being able to focus upon all those little things that we normally don't focus on. And I thought a great movie for this section is the film About Schmidt, starring Jack Nicholson, from 2002. And here's a little summary of the plot from Wick's Wikipedia page. Warren Schmidt is retiring from his position as an actuary who is someone who deals with the measurement and management of risk and uncertainty with Woodman of the World, a life insurance company in Omaha, Nebraska. After a retirement dinner, Schmidt finds it hard to adjust to his new life, feeling useless. He sees a television advertisement about a foster program for African children, Plan USA, and decides to sponsor a child. He soon receives an information package with a photo of his foster child, a small Tanzanian boy named Ndogo Umbo, to whom he relates his life in a series of candid, rambling letters. Schmidt visits his young successor at the life insurance company to offer his help, but the offer is politely declined. As he leaves the building, Schmidt sees the contents and files of his office, the sum of his entire career set out for garbage collectors. He describes to Ndogo his long-time alienation from his wife, Helen, who suddenly dies from a blood clot in her brain just after their purchase of a Winnebago adventurer motorhome. Jeannie, his only daughter, and her fiancé, Randall Hertz, arrive from Denver. They console him at the funeral, but Jeannie later berates him for taking his wife for granted. such as by refusing to fully pay for the Winnebago. He wanted the cheaper Mini Winnie and burying her in a cheap casket. He asks her to move back to take care of him, but she refuses. Meanwhile, Randall tries to entice him into a pyramid scheme. Schmidt feels his daughter could do better than Randall, a waterbed salesman. After the couple leaves, Schmidt is overcome by loneliness. He stops showering, sleeps in front of the television, and goes shopping with a coat over pajamas to load up on frozen foods. In his wife's closet, he discovers some hidden love letters disclosing her long ago affair with Ray, a mutual friend whom Schmidt angrily confronts. He decides to take a journey alone in his new Winnebago to visit his daughter and convince her not to marry Randall. He tells Jeannie he is leaving early for the wedding, but she makes it clear she doesn't want him there until right before the ceremony. Schmidt decides to visit places from his past, including his college campus and fraternity at University of Kansas and his hometown in Nebraska. His childhood home has been replaced by a tire shop, and while at a trailer campground, he is invited to dinner by a friendly and sympathetic couple. When the man leaves to buy some beer, Schmidt makes a pass at his wife and flees in terror when she adamantly rejects his advance. Sitting on the roof of his RV on a starry night, Schmidt forgives his departed wife for her affair and apologizes to her for his own failings as a husband. At that moment, he's amazed to see a bright meteor strike across the sky as a possible sign from Helen that she forgives him. Feeling full of purpose and energetic renewal, Schmidt arrives in Denver, where he stays at the home of Roberta, Randall's mother, and he is appalled by Randall's eccentric, socially odd family and tries to unsuccessfully dissuade Jeannie from the marriage. Schmidt throws out his back after sleeping on Randall's waterbed, infuriating Jeannie, and Roberta assures Schmidt that a soak in her hot tub will help his back, but he flees after a nude Roberta makes a pass at him in the tub. The next day, Schmidt, exhausted from a restless night, attends the wedding and delivers a kind speech at the reception, hiding his disapproval. On his way home from Denver, Schmidt composes a letter to Undugu, and Schmidt questions what he's accomplished in life, lamenting that he will soon be dead, and that his life has made no difference to anyone, and that it will be as if he never existed at all. A pile of mail is waiting for him at home, and Schmidt opens a letter from Tanzania, and it's from a nun who writes that Undugu is 6 years old and is unable to read and reply to Schmidt's letters on his own, but he appreciates them and Schmidt's financial support very much. A cartoon drawing by Undugu is enclosed, showing two smiling stick figures, one large and one small, holding hands on a sunny day, and Schmidt is moved to tears as the film ends. And so it's a really quite beautiful movie as well. Highly recommended for a wee watch if you've never seen it as well. And fantastic performance by Jack Nicholson. So what's so great about the movie and the way in which it relates into the section is that we can not only think about the little things, of course, and the importance of ultimately what we normally sweep under the carpet, not only in terms of the state and all the big grand things that can happen in life, but also just applying it to our everyday life and daily life as it occurs as well, because that's what happens in the movie with Jack Nicholson's character, is that ultimately he's lived his life and he's went through the whole paces of everything that's occurred, and of course he's managed to achieve all the great events that everybody's meant to have occurred within their life. He's gotten married, he's had children, and now he's worked and is going to be enjoying his retirement, which is a prospect for everybody on the grand scheme of things to look forward to, going through all those big events within everyone's life. And so the whole significance of the movie then comes to that point where he realizes that suddenly, what meaning has he achieved to his life? How has he contributed to the world in any significant way? What ultimately will people think about him? What will people say about him once he's dead? Will anybody even remember him at all? And so it's that whole sense of wanting to have a semblance of meaning out of our life as well that really touches upon the deep question within the movie. How can we grasp it meaning? Is it through the big things and grand events within life, within marriage, children, and retirement? Or is it rather the little things and its emphasis on all the little things that we normally forget about in the midst of all those big grand things that occur? And of course, it is all about those little things. That's what Nietzsche's arguing about. It's not all the things that make all the noise, but rather everything that's inaudible that we forget about, that's normally considered to be insignificant to us. And we have that whole relationship as well of within the movie Jack Nicholson obviously not having a great relationship with either his wife or his daughter, having been in the past. Why is that the case? Because he's treated ultimately work as a much greater significant event within his life and doing the daily 9 to 5 than ultimately having a deeper relationship with his own wife and child. And then that is the whole oh my god situation when he's in retirement, of course, because then he's thinking, I want to have a deeper relationship suddenly with my child now. In fact, I absolutely hate the in-laws that I could potentially end up with having to visit and so forth, and I absolutely hate potential future son-in-law as well. I'm actually going to do something about it. I'm going to try and stop all this from happening, in which of course he does, and does so in a futile sense. And then it's sort of left under the question, well, was his actions actually have any purpose or meaning at all? And then, of course, it's making that point right at the end of the movie when he's made the whole donation to support the African child as well through a charity organization, that he suddenly realizes that actually his actions have had an impact upon another person's life and how they're able to live their life. And ultimately, even though he in his own life has made lots of mistakes, and of course he's tried to atone for them as he's went through, it's suddenly that significance of, well, actually I have made an impact in a way just towards another person's life there in the movie. And that's why of course he's then brought to tears, because he suddenly found the meaning and importance of his actions and his whole life having a purpose, and that actually everything wasn't pointless in the first place, and he did help in the end, even if it wasn't his own life in a deeper way, although he did atone for his own problems within it. And if it wasn't actually helping his daughter, then at least he was able to help another person who he didn't even know on a very much deeper level. So overall for this section, then we can say, well, Nietzsche makes us think and question the way in which we have all the importance upon big, grand events that occur. As he says, they like to make lots of noise, but actually what we need to do is focus on all the little things, because that's actually the things that will have importance and significance to us, and not the big things that happen. Many thanks for listening to the episode. Feel free to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/dissectingphilosophy. Also, feel free to drop me a wee email at my address, dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com. And I could also be found on Twitter at I am a rubberman. Many thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time.